Thanks for clicking! A new Canadian government report predicts a terrifying 2040. This according to numerous accounts of a recent government report, Future Lives, Social Mobility in Question. The report is said to paint the picture of a dystopian nightmare, predicting a terrifying 2040, a collapsed economy, and Canadians having to hunt for their own food. And given the current headlines, it's not surprising that the report has gained some traction. However, some, such as CBC, made an attempt to discredit some of the more hyperbolic themes being pushed, noting that the report is far from stark, stressing that the document is not meant to predict the future. CBC, shockingly, misses the point. The report isn't so much a report as it is a make-work project, thrown together with very minimal thought or research.
I do the same thing.
So what I want to do today is go over the report that's making the rounds, take a look at what the report actually says about Canada in 2040, and then discuss the extent to which this is a well-researched report. A 10-page report with only 6 footnotes, 4 of which you cite yourself, isn't exactly the marker of a well-researched investigation.
Really?
As we'll see today, while the future might not be as bleak as being painted by the report or as being painted by those reporting on the report, the headwinds are adding up. We will obviously continue to track how current uncertainties play out on this channel with a data-driven approach. Make sure you click like and subscribe if you want to get those updates, but for now, let's get into this report. On to the report, which paints the picture of a future where social mobility is limited, where, as the report says, there are more snakes than ladders. And the report does paint a fairly grim picture, a future where post-secondary education is no longer a reliable path to social mobility, owning a home is not a realistic goal for many.
Well, that would be bad.
People rarely mix with others of differing socioeconomic status, youth will aspire to be social mobile without any realistic chance of realizing that goal, and AI has shrunk the value of labor. And yeah, it's difficult to argue with a lot of that. Social mobility already feels elusive to many Canadians, and has for a very long time. First-time homebuyers are relying on gifted down payments more and more, and AI will obviously transform the global economy. People rarely mixing with others of differing socioeconomic statuses, that's hardly anything new, just ask Marie Antoinette, though that story isn't actually factually based either. Regardless though, as a result of these new realities, the report says that the Canadian economy could shrink, mental health could suffer, workers could leave the country, people might find alternative ways of meeting their needs, and post-secondary education could become a stranded asset, all resulting in people rejecting the systems of which they think have failed them. And yeah, under that trajectory, it's no doubt that people would reject that system, as the part of the report that's making the headlines is that people will need to hunt, fish, and forage on public lands to meet their sustenance. That does paint a very Hunger Games-esque future scenario.
It was really great work.
But here's the problem. There's very little causal connection between the description of the problems and how they lead to that dystopian future. The report presents the scenario as here's the problem, here's what could happen, but misses the transmission mechanism in between. I'll give you an example. The report says in 2040, owning a home is not a realistic goal, which results in a shrinking economy and young people giving up on the idea of home ownership, which could leave those with existing capital or equity in a position to snap up more and more residential property. Which, sure, we could see affordability continue to worsen. We could see housing prices move up ad infinitum forever and ever, pricing out an increasingly large share of the Canadian population.
Sounds good. Sign me up.
That means less buyers.
Really?
Regardless though, while the report presents this as an almost inevitable march, as the US case reminds us, affordability is something that ebbs and flows. Affordability was at its worst point right before the global financial crisis, and then fell substantially and stayed there until rates went to zero, which happens all the time. Societies over-leverage and then de-leverage. But the problem is the report doesn't discuss the next 15 years that lead to its inevitable result. It could have just as easily said that house prices are going to remain flat for the next 15 years as they have for the past 3. There's no data in this report, no case studies, no projections, simply painting a picture of what could happen. This isn't a research paper, this is a thought experiment, to put it charitably. And on that charity, people hunting for their own food on public lands. Ideally, for even first-year university, what you'd want to do is find similar cases where countries of similar levels of economic development, current levels of development, industrialization, capital stock, etc., devolved to such an extent that hunting for food on public lands was common, and then compare those cases with that of Canada's. those starting points with that of Canada's if you wanted to make that conclusion as a realistic possibility.
Could be 1 month, could be 2 months.
To my knowledge, you wouldn't be able to find one, and unsurprisingly, the report doesn't list one. It just lists ranges of possibilities, no footnotes, no sources, no cases. And very similar to housing and the public hunting for food, childcare and healthcare cooperatives become more common. In this case, what you'd want to do in conducting an actual report is find other cases where the retrenchment of the state, the gradual disappearance of state institutions, led to civic-like institutions stepping in to fill the void to provide what used to be state-fulfilled functions. Something like Robert Putnam's Making Democracy Work, Civic Traditions in Modern Italy. This report doesn't do any of that. No citations, no data, no cases. And again, this really isn't a study, this really isn't a report, it's not even really a thought experiment. It's a guy standing on the median holding a sign that says the end is near.
Drive like hell, you'll get there.
Which even a spokesperson for Policy Horizons kind of alluded to in a statement to CBC, noting that the report is an exploration of a potential future meant to assist in government planning. I tend to think it's a justification for UBI, but that's a different video for another time. But that's about as far as the CBC went. No discussion about the lack of cases, the lack of citations, the lack of research, etc. But it's not even just the CBC. The National Post said the report outlines likely scenarios. The Toronto Sun actually referenced the Hunger Games, noting the terrifying stuff of the future. And the Calgary Herald, much the same thing. And look, none of this is to say that Canadians don't have a lot of challenges on the horizon. Housing is still unaffordable, and AI will no doubt be disruptive. But this report that's making its way across the media, that is now a dominant issue in the Canadian election, isn't a report. It's no different than what occurred across dinner tables all around Canada over the past weekend. It's spitballing, very few data, very few facts. It's, hey, this is one of a million things that could happen if current events remain unchanged. It's certainly not predicting a terrifying 2040 in 15 years. If anything, the most terrifying part of this report is that taxpayers paid for this make work project. I asked ChatGPT to give me something similar but with a positive spin, and it gave me the following, and look at all the well-researched sources. That took 15 seconds. How much money did this make work project cost Canadian taxpayers and is now dominating the Canadian political discussion? The substance of which, or lack thereof, is being completely ignored by our traditional media. So, in summary, the report, it's not a report, paints a pretty bleak picture for Canada in 2040. Yet, as I've tried to stress, this report isn't really a report. It's a report in name only. There's very, very little research, very, very few sources, citing themselves for 4 out of their 6 sources, making very, very loose, if any, causal connections. This is all just hyperbolic nonsense permeating the campaign, permeating the election issues, hyperbolic nonsense produced and paid for by taxpayers, and as always, going unchecked by the media. And all of that, the lack of substance in the government report, the fact that that report was made, the fact that the media unchecked, all of this is the real terrifying part of 2040. Look at that. Facts, sources, research, and causal connections.
Whoa!
We will continue to provide that research, those sources, that data on this channel. Make sure you click like and subscribe if you want to get those updates. But for now, thanks so much for watching.